Do you remember the newspaper? An artifact of the past, probably. How many get the newspaper at your house? Still get the newspaper? I'm always harking back to D.C. where I'm from, but in Washington they had this thing called the Daily News. It was daily. And it was a newspaper that was not as big as the normal ones, and you could turn it like a book, because it was kind of large. And I loved to read that. They didn't make it, sadly. One day when we went out and looked for the Daily News of Washington, D.C., the porch was blank. There was no news. But there were other papers. And then we began to get acquainted with Walter Cronkite and Tom Brokaw. I loved Walter Cronkite. At the end of his newscast, he'd say, "And that's the way it is." But he couldn't say that today because the news doesn't tell us the way it is. I don't know how much of a news junkie you are. I like the news because I want to be current. And I have a spiritual need that I need to fulfill as a pastor reading the news. I'm just plain nosy. I want to see who's doing what, when, where, how. NEWS, 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 north, east, west, south. We get to see that. We'll see on the news, in the paper, and Time Magazine and other places we'll never visit, but we get to visit them mentally, and we get to see pictures. Do you remember real journalism? We have opinion today more than news. We used to say, there's little that shocks us anymore. We don't say that anymore because there's a scandal du jour almost every day. And stuff does shock us today. It's frightening. The rapidity, ugly things are happening in the world. When the governor of one of our great states says it's okay to kill a baby after it's been delivered and it's on the table, that to me was shocking. And there's other things that are out there that, and I am so celebrity fatigued, aren't you? Are you celebrity fatigued? I'm tired of seeing what the celebrities are wearing, doing, and what they're eating, and who they're with, and who they're not with now, and where they're going, where they've been, what they're saying. Tell me about small-town America. Tell me about the grandmother on the streets of Richmond, California. Tell me about real news. So at the end of the day, I can say with Walter Cronkite, that's the way it was today. But we are shocked. And we little anticipate the things that come our way. There was a famous, very voluptuous movie star that was married to a decrepit old millionaire several years ago, and they could not let that news go. Meanwhile, on the streets of India was Mother Teresa. No press. Today, in Kenya and other places, Christians are being killed for their faith. You're probably not going to see that on CNN or on Fox because it approaches the politically incorrect arena. So some things do shock us today. We need the respite of the quiet place. And when Mike reiterated what was in the bulletin today about coming to the creek bank and walking the church property, it's a peaceful place. We need those respite times. Why don't we just listen to the birds and the crickets and the water? We don't need the news overload that we are bombarded with constantly. The scandals in the tabloids of yesteryear are now the major news today. What was reported in the yellow tabloids of long ago when few people read that stuff is today's major news. We need to be sure that we are not being indoctrinated to further political agendas and preconceived notions and ideas of other people. We need to make up our own minds about stuff. We need to be informed. We need the quiet time so that we can unravel some things. Events today so often are just seen on the surface and reported as it was in depth. We're not seeing the in depth because truth unfolds, lies hit you in the face. Truth unfolds like a blossom. And not only lies, just those sensational things. The book of Proverbs says, gossip is like a juicy morsel that goes down into your soul. Be careful you do that, you're going to get indigestion. But we need to be able to say to ourselves and to others, I don't know. Haven't made up my mind yet. Why don't we just say, the truth has not unfolded itself to my heart yet, or my mind. Someone in the media recently said, arrows and lies fly via 747 and truth comes by dog sled. But truth is there for us to take if we're patient. Christians, be careful about thinking other people's thoughts on Facebook and the internet. James Russell Lowell stood on the brink of the Civil War and looked at America. And he said these great lines. It's a great poem. You should read the whole thing. James Russell Lowell. Careless seems the great avenger, history's pages but record. When death grapple in the darkness twixt old systems and the word. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold always sways the future. And behind the dim unknown stands our God within the shadows, keeping watch above his own. We need to be patient about our beliefs, lest we find ourselves invested in things that are not true and faithful and right. And we may know a lot of facts that are true to the exclusion of other truths that are so much more important. We have little patience to read the Bible anymore. Little patience to read the Word of God. And we do need to read that. Thank you, James Russell Lowell, for reminding us that although it seems like truth is on the scaffold and wrong is on the throne, God is still standing in the shadows, keeping watch above his own. God is patient. It's okay. It's really okay not to have an opinion about everything. And when other people around you are so sure, and why aren't you as sure as I am? It's okay to say, I just don't know yet. I have not digested this, and I don't know enough truth. It has not unfolded itself to me as yet. And I'm listening for the voice of God. Patiently, we need to wait and say, don't know yet. Get back to you. It's also, here's something really important. Christian, of all people on earth, you and I, Christians, every one of us, should question the things that we feel very passionately about. If you feel very passionately about something and it just kind of dominates your thought life, question it, because you may know the surface of something and not the deeper truth that's not yet unfolded. History has not yet been written about some things, and we need to be patient. I would encourage you to pick up the Bible and read the book of Proverbs. It's very easy to read. You don't have to be a Philadelphia lawyer to read Proverbs. It's pretty plain. A lady came to her pastor and said, Pastor, I can't read that Bible. I don't understand anything about it. And he said to her, Mabel, open the book of Proverbs. She came back to him a month later after she read a chapter a week. She says, I can't stand that book of Proverbs. I understand everything in it. Because it'll show you your ways. Isn't it good to rest our hearts and hear Paul Harvey say, and now the rest of the story, which has not unfolded yet. But as I was saying, you and I do need to question those things that we're passionate about. Are you passionate about God? Are you passionate about the Word and your worship as you are your political opinions? This world's not going to be changed, but for a moment, in a second, by political maneuverings. The Word of God stands like a rock of Gibraltar to change all of history and your life and mine. Jesus was the news. He was consistently criticized, categorized, challenged, misquoted, misunderstood, and maligned. But he was the news. And it's amazing how fast the news can travel without Google or the internet. How fast can a rumor go through a company of 1,000 people via word of mouth and ear? Quickly. And by the time it gets to the end of that 1,000 persons, the truth is totally turned around. It's completely different than what it was to start with. Mark 12:37 says this. When Jesus spoke his deity, he said, the Pharisees could not stand him. And they knew what he was claiming. He claimed to be God. And that's why they wanted to kill him. But in Luke 12:37, it says, the common people heard him gladly. The common people heard him gladly. The religious authorities and the theologians and those in political power didn't seem to like Jesus much. Some of them did. Gamaliel and Nicodemus, some of the others. But it says the common people heard him gladly because his word had the ring of truth. Can you hear that? Can you hear the ring of truth in something? On the other hand, sometimes you can hear that little red flag that pops up and says, there ain't something right here. Something's, this looks good, this sounds good, but there's something just not right here. But you can hear the ring of truth. When I read the Gospels, and I don't understand all they say, and I don't understand what Jesus did and said some of the things, but it has the ring of authentic truth, and I can rest myself in it. The truth and power in the word and personality and the love of Jesus was invincible. Still is, to those who will avail themselves. But the most common criticism in the news media of the day, through the temple courts, through the Sanhedrin of the 70, through the common people, and 3 times in the Bible, this criticism was made of Jesus, and it was true. This criticism was true. In Luke 15:3, these Pharisees saw Jesus with prostitutes, saw him with people who were traitors to their country, members of the mafia in our day. And they sneered down their noses and said, this man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. Look at him. He's doing it right now over there in Zacchaeus' house. This man welcomes sinners. That criticism is also in Matthew 11:19 and also Luke 7:34. 3 times people recognize that Jesus drew as a magnet the outcast of society. It says that Jesus was with the publicans and the sinners and the prostitutes of the day. And it says and I won't, maybe I could just show it to you really, about the scandalous goodness of Jesus. I won't read this all, because there's some things about this story about the prodigal son and comes up before it in the word in Luke chapter 15. Now the word all is not translated in the NIV, but it should be there. It's the word pas, pas. Now all of the publicans and sinners were drawing near to hear Jesus. And they were so drawn to him. And they were unafraid of him. The publicans and sinners had their names read out loud in the synagogue by the rabbi as those who were excommunicated from the society of the synagogue. They were not welcome. Maybe they shouldn't have been. But they actually read their names at times. And they were excommunicated from the synagogue. You ever known anybody that was kicked out of church? That'll probably never happen here. There was many of these folks that even though they may have been brought back into fellowship, into the covenant with God, The door was slammed in their face. They had the Hirim read over them. Cursed you will be in the city. Cursed you will be in the field. Anybody else who deals with you will be cursed as you are. Wow. Jesus didn't care about that. I don't care if your name was read in the synagogue. Pinole, the great philosopher, Jewish philosopher of around the end of the 17th century, he questioned some of the interpretations of the rabbis, and so they gave him a Hirim. And he cooperated with it. And so much so that he went to the synagogue and he laid over the door, and everybody in the synagogue walked over his body. He became a lonely person. His whole culture in Amsterdam, in Holland, kicked him out. But you know what? Jesus didn't kick him out. The door of Jesus stood open for him and others. And so these people that it says the publicans and sinners were drawing near to hear Jesus. When the rabbis went down the street and those people who were religious, when they saw these people coming down the street, they went to the other side. They were not welcome into their very presence. Jesus drew these people. He spoke to them. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. Interesting word in the Greek, muttered, complained. Under their breath, they were grumbling, looking down their noses at someone who was not welcome in the faith and the covenant anymore. You know, there are people like that today. There are people today who've been kicked out of church. Maybe not like people walked over their body, but they were just not welcome anymore because of a rumor or a mistake or a sin in their lives. Those are the people that you need to reach out to. And they muttered about Jesus, this man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. He's doing it right now. Look at that. He did. It was a total scandal. We don't understand when we look at Luke chapter 15 what a scandal this was. That in the very presence of Jesus, prostitutes, tax collectors, and sinners were hanging on his every word. Even washed the feet of the Lord Jesus and washed them with their tears when she was kicked out by everybody else. Jesus reached into the space of the leper. He touched the prostitutes. He touched those who were outcasts of society, those who had had their name read in the synagogue. Well, you say maybe they deserved the treatment they got from society, but Jesus was another story. And it was a scandal. I was going to tell you the story, but I'm going to tell you anyway because of the person's name involved. But you know who Tony Campolo is? Tony Campolo? He was, I'm not sure he's still there, but he was the chair of the sociology department of Columbia University in New York. And he loved Jesus. And he was like a Don Wrinkles of Christianity. Kind of looked like him too. And he found himself in a Midwestern city due to some flight, couldn't make flights and so forth. He got into town at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't serve any food on a plane. And so he's starving to death. So he goes to this diner in downtown, and I think it was Chicago, but I'm not sure of the town. But he goes there, and he's sitting there, and he gets his hamburger, and he's eating it. And while he's eating his hamburger, 3 o'clock in the morning, mind you, 3 prostitutes walk in from the street. Here's this guy who loved Jesus. He's sitting there. These ladies of the evening. So one gal says to the other gal, check me out on this. I'll show you we can read this. One gal says to one of the other two, she says, tomorrow's my birthday. And the other 2 prostitutes says, what do you want us to do about that? Bake you a cake or something? Want us to throw you a party? And she was hurt. And she says, you know, I never had a birthday party in my whole life. Never had one. Tony heard that. He found out from the guy behind the counter that those three ladies came in there every night, every morning about 3 o'clock. Guess what Tony did? The next night, he came to that same diner. He should have been sleeping because he's teaching during the day. And guess what Tony brings with him? A birthday cake. I think this is so great. And so this lady is so moved, and the other ones are kind of, figuring out, and they leave, and she takes the cake with her. She didn't let anybody have any of it. This is her very own first birthday cake, and she takes it home wherever she went. So the guy behind the counter is talking to Tony Capallo, this very erudite professor. And he says, "Are you a minister or something?" He said, "Yeah, or something." And he said, "What kind of church do you preach at?" He said, "I preach at the church that gives birthday cakes to prostitutes at 3 o'clock in the morning." And he says, "No, you don't." He said, "If that was true, I'd join your church." Now, I can see some people driving past. I saw Tony Campolo talking to three ladies of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning. What's he doing? I thought he was a Christian. They didn't know the rest of the story. And so Jesus goes on and tells them the story about the lost sheep. We have a lot in common with sheep, Sheep are pretty dumb. We may share some of that. But they put their heads down and start eating. They'll eat themselves lost. They don't know where they are. They just know where the next blade of grass is, and they could fall over a cliff. And they do that. But Jesus talks about that. He talks about the lady who lost one of her 10 coins. It wasn't that she wanted to go to the mall and buy something with that one coin. No, this was a set. It's like you had a diamond ring with some sets. One of the sets was gone. What does she do? She's sweeping the house looking for that little coin. It could be woven into her hair. It could be put into a necklace or a bracelet. And it was for her wedding. And so Jesus says, there are lost sheep. There are lost coins. But when a sheep is lost, you go after it. When a coin's lost, you go find it. When a son is lost, he goes to a far country and you can't do anything about it. You know why? There's a human will involved. And so the son goes of the father, this great story about the son. I'll just tell you the story. And Diane read it very eloquently to us a few moments ago. Jesus said, when one sinner repents, you see these folks gathered around me that are listening to the parables I'm telling. If one of these, just one of this many, has a change of heart, all of heaven rejoices. Here's something about this, too, I wanted to share with you. I found out about the Greek the other day. When I hear about this, that all heaven rejoices if one sinner repents. Somebody comes to the altar and prays and gets saved, or somebody leads them to the Lord. It says, there is joy in the midst of the angels. It's not audible, it's visual. See this. The angels suddenly are bathed with the light of joy when one sinner comes to know Christ. I'm not making this up. Jesus said, there's joy in heaven when one sinner repents. The Pharisees had a saying that all heaven rejoices when one sinner drops into hell. They actually had that saying. Jesus turned it around. We need to get our theology sometimes turned around so it matches what Jesus said. There's joy in heaven when the son comes home. I'll show you that in a minute. But this story is, the son goes off. He leaves the covenant land of Israel. I'm tired of this religion. I've had this religion all my life. I know the prayers. I know the synagogue. I know the rabbis. I'm booking. And he takes off. And I believe it's a true story Jesus told. Where the father was probably, he could look across the valley to the high, distant mountains of Samaria, and he knew his son was someplace over there, beyond those mountains. His heart was aching for his son. Do you know what that feels like? To ache inside for someone. Do you know what it feels like to ache in your heart when you can do nothing? And every time you say something, they just jump on, it's you have nothing you can say. And so the father is waiting. We don't know how long he waited. You know the story. The son, the young son, is destitute at some point. He's hungry. He's getting indigestion from eating the pods that the pigs ate. He says, you know what? My dad's a smart businessman. I'm going to go and make him a business proposition. The servants in my father's house are better off than me. By this time, he had all of his fingernails were caked with the dirt of the pigs. And his toenails were full of the muck of the pig pen. And his body was different than it used to be as a sweet child of his father. And he's just not the same person. And so he gets up and he says, I'm going to go make this proposition to my dad. Dad, I've sinned against heaven, but when you have an opening in your employment line, would you consider me just to be one of your servants? Because I've sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you. But before any of this happens, he's on the road. He comes across those mountains, and he's a sinner. He's one of those dirty sinners that smells like pigs. The ones that the Pharisees would walk across the other side of the street for. But the father is sitting there, he's waiting. And he's looking, and he looks across the horizon, and there's a speck on the horizon. And there's something about that speck, the way it moves. And it gets closer and closer. He said, that's walking like my son. You know how you can love the way somebody walks? If you hate somebody, you can say, oh, I hate the way you walk. Or if you love somebody, you say, oh, doesn't he walk wonderfully? And so he's a silhouette on the horizon, and his father recognizes him. He gets up off the porch, and he does something so out of character for an elder. And this guy, this father, is probably 50 from the story, or thereabout. He's an elder in Israel. He's wealthy. We know that. He's got jewelry. He's got fine clothing to spare. And Jesus tells the scandalous story about this pig-infested muck person being clothed with the robe of the father and having a ring put on his finger and sandals on his feet so he doesn't look like a slave anymore. And the father picks up his robe and runs. That was taboo. If you're 50 in Israel at this time, you don't show your ankles. I don't know. It was the picture of decorum. His heart did not let him act that way. He took off. He said, quick, put the robe around him. Why do you want that? Because he didn't want his son to be embarrassed. Put that ring on his finger. What that meant was, he has my blessing. And so I can see the son from the other point of view coming down the road. He sees his father running to him. He says, oh, I'm in trouble now. Does he have a stick in his hand? No, he's got love in his heart. Just the other day, and I'm emotional about this. You know, I had a big bunch of books on the back of the table back there. Did you see them? And some of you took some of those books. This young man from Vallejo called me. He saw them on Craigslist. He says, you still have those books? I said, yeah, you can come get them. About an hour he came. And I said, why do you want these Christian books? He said, I'm trying to get closer to God. And so I gave him those books. I took him into my office and gave him some more books. And while I'm looking for some more books for him, he said, I should tell you why I really want these books. He says, not too long ago, my house was a dumpster enclosure. I slept behind the dumpster in Vallejo. And he said, I've been to church a couple times, but I was abusing drugs and abusing alcohol and abusing myself, abusing my family. And I'm sleeping behind the dumpster in Vallejo. He said, one morning I got up and I woke up. He said, I got to change. This has got to stop. He said, I know what he's doing, but he said, I just called on Jesus Oh, Lord Jesus, help me. Save me. Help me, Lord Jesus. And he prayed with all of his heart to the Lord. These are his words, not mine. And he said he was instantly changed. Instantly changed. That didn't happen that way with everybody, but he was instantaneously changed. He said he felt it happen. I'm going to have him back. But he's busy. I said, what are you doing nowadays? He says, I'm working for Teen Challenge, and I'm helping these other drug addicts and alcoholics try to get themselves straight. But I'm getting so impatient with those guys. He says, I wasn't changed instantaneously, but these guys, they're just wearing me out because they just have to keep being counseled, you know. Valentine's Day is what I'm talking about from the Richmond Rescue Mission. But he walked away with 2 big boxes of books. And I was in this sanctuary here with stars in my eyes and my heart throbbing warm. If I had to call it a day and go home and close the door, it's okay now. It's okay now. You know, there are people, bless their hearts, and some Christians don't get it and churches don't get it. You're sleeping where? In a pig pen? Behind a dumpster? Looking at that person with a suspicious eye. I'm sure when he got himself saved and he got out of that dumpster enclosure for the last time, looked back over his shoulder and said, I'm not going back there anymore. And some people wouldn't have took him in. They wouldn't have. He smelled like the dumpster. He smelled like used grapefruit rinds or something. But Jesus saved him. And I relate to that. I called on Jesus when I was 16 years old, and God saved me. And so the scandalous thing, here's a little story. And when I read this last week, this is so perfect. Because in this story, there are 2 lost sons. You know that, right? There's the young son and the older son. Both of them didn't know the father. And so these brothers who really loved each other in the Midwest, they coming home from school one day, always walked home together. And they got to the long stretch of the place where there was some woods. And out of the woods jumped these big boys, teenagers. And his big brother said, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And they were. So these teenagers were laughing at them, pushing them around, knocking them down, and, sporting with them. And so they took some rope that they had with them and just tied them so tight together. They took these 2 boys and tied them really tight together. They couldn't get loose. And drug them to this field, left them in the middle of this field, and left away laughing. And so the younger guy tells his older brothers, oh, I'm glad they're gone. Oh, they're gone. We can't get loose now. And they struggled for hours trying to get those knots loose, but they just gave up. Night fell. Starting to get cold, and the stars are out, and the moon's out, and they're crying, and they're waiting. They're just hoping somebody can come by and see them in that deserted place. And off in the distance, they hear something. Jimmy, Bobby, where are you? It's a voice of their father. The voice of their father. And they said their hearts whelmed with thanksgiving and praise because it's the very first time that they ever loved the voice of their father. And he released them. The story of the prodigal son. Prodigal sons. They were bound. The voice of the father released them both. Here's a truth that comes out of the prodigal son. The word son in Luke chapter 15, there's 2 words for son. Huios and teknon. Huios just means my son. Teknon means, oh, my dear son. My dear son. The father called the young son who came back home, Huios, oh, my son. But when he went back out there to call his older son and soothe his wounds and he called him teknon. Oh, he said, oh, my dear son, my firstborn, my little boy. That was the older son. He called his young son Huios. He called his older brother teknon, my dear, dear son. And we don't know what happened after that. Jesus left the story with ... fill in the blank. But I see the heart of the Father, don't you? And the scandal, the unmitigated scandal of that father receiving that son back. Throwing a barbecue for him. Oh, kill old Spotty the fatted cow, bring him out here. Let's have a barbecue, my son's back. That was a scandal. How could you do that? He took your money, gave it to prostitutes, and now you're just taking him back in? That's the way God works. Because that son repented. The older son was, in his interview with the father, said, oh, this son of yours, read it, it's in there, this son of yours. And then the father said, oh, my dear son, everything I have belongs to you. I'm here for you. Come on in. This brother of yours, did you get that? This son of yours. And the father says, oh, no, this brother of yours. You know, some Christians don't get that line yet. This brother of yours. He's home safe and sound. And just like those boys tied up in the field, he freed them both because he was a good dad. Bruce Springsteen, I'll just end with this. He had a big change in his life. But he said when he made it big, making a lot of money, he took care of his parents. Modesto, California, I believe. His dad could never say, I love you. Couldn't utter the words. There was a block. He could not say, I love you. His dad gets in the car and drives to L.A. someplace from Modesto where Bruce Springsteen is having his first son. And all he would say, Bruce Springsteen would say to him, Dad, I love you. And he would say, me too. He just could not say, I love you. But then he did say one thing before he left. He said, Bruce, you've been so good to your mom and I, but I've not been good to you. And Bruce said, that's all I needed. A little while later, Bruce Springsteen's dad had a stroke. And he was laying in bed with tears coming out of his eyes because he loved his son. And Bruce came up to him and said, Dad, I love you. And his dad said, me too. And then Bruce Springsteen knew that me too was heartfelt and meant. And so we say to our Father, Father, I love you. Thank you for taking people from behind dumpsters and out of pig pens. Help me to see them as my brother. Bless your name, God. Pray with me.